What we'd like to do in this example is figure out how many miles are required for a particular trip on a particular airline. So right here in this table, different airlines have a different number of miles depending on whether you have a one-way trip or a round-trip ticket. So that's clearly a table lookup, so your first instinct, of course, would be to try to use VLOOKUP. And if VLOOKUP doesn't work, then you might want to go ahead and use, of course, index match. But let's try VLOOKUP first. What we'd like to do is find the airline in the lookup table. And the lookup table, of course, is a lookup table over here. And the first instinct, of course, would be to highlight the entire table. But you got to remember that VLOOKUP requires that the lookup value, AA, UA, JB in this particular case, is the leftmost column in the table, which clearly in this particular case it's not. That would be column 1, column 2, column 3. So what do you do? Well, approach 1 would be to go ahead and use index match, or simply make the table smaller. In that case, you're only using this part of the lookup table, and now your lookup value becomes the leftmost part in the table you've selected. The one-way ticket miles becomes column 2, and the round-trip miles becomes column 3. Now the problem, of course, is that in this case right here, you need to decide whether it's round-trip or business. Round-trip or one-way. Don't worry about that initially. Initially, just say, you know what, let's just assume it's one way. That's column 2. And then later on, you can worry about figuring out how to get to either column 2 or column 3. And then very important for VLOOKUP, always remember that the last parameter indicates whether you're doing an exact lookup in the table. In other words, if you're looking for AA, you're trying to find exactly AA in that table. If you're looking for JB, JetBlue, you're trying to find exactly JB. You're not trying to find an airline that's between AA and UA alphabetically. So you got to make sure that you specify false for the last parameter. If you fail to specify false for the last parameter, if you leave it out, defaults to true. That's going to work in this particular case by sheer coincidence. Now, let's try this out a bit more. Let's make sure that when we copy this down that we have the right anchoring. So A2 becomes A3, that's desirable, but B2 becomes B3. We don't want to look up table to change. We're going to anchor that. Now we move that down. And it happens to kind of work, I think, kind of more or less. Probably not really, but anyway, never a good idea to leave the last parameter out. Always make sure if you're doing an exact lookup, you change it to false, because the default value is true. But even though that works right now, we still have another problem, and that is we need to look up a one-way ticket set of miles if we got a one-way ticket that we want to look up, or round trip. And right here we always look for column number 2, which again, if you look at that lookup table, that's column 2. Sometimes needs to be column 3. So what do you do if you sometimes need to have column 2 and sometimes column 3? Well, the way you pick one value versus another is to use an if statement. So if this value right here for the ticket is equal to one way, then you got to find column 2 in the table. Otherwise, you assume it's round trip, and it's got to be column 3 in that lookup table. So let's see if that works. And it does. So the key has to be that if you're looking at one value or another, or using one value or another, that you always use an if. So in this case, we use column 2. If the ticket is for one-way ticket, we use column 3 if it is a round-trip ticket.